Assalamu alaikum viewers. Historical research. History is a meaningful record of human achievements. History is used to understand the past and to try to understand the present in the light of past events and developments. Historical research has great value in the field of education because it is necessary to know and understand educational achievements and trends of the past in order to gain insight of the present and future directions. Types of historical research. Education has a history and it needs to be studied. Historical studies to be conducted in the field of education may include bibliographic research, legal research, research on history of ideas, and history of institutions and organizations. Bibliographic research. Such type of historical research aims at presenting the important facts about the life, character, idea and contribution of educators, philosophers and scholars to the field of education. In Pakistani context, the contribution of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Khaldun, Shah Waliullah, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Allama Iqbal and other leading educationalists along with their influence on current educational practices and thoughts can be studied. Legal research. Legal research is of the vital importance and interest to educational administrators. It aims at studying the legal basis of the institutions being run by the different religious and other groups. The legal status of the teachers and students, administrations of the privately managed schools, financing of education, and the participation of the community and students representatives in the management of education at various levels. And legal research needs special training in the field of law, as anyone without such training is not considered to be the competent enough to do such type of research. Research on history of ideas. Research on history of ideas involves studying the major philosophical and the scientific thoughts. It also aims at tracing the changes in the popular thoughts and attitudes over a given period of time. The evolution of modern concepts such as team teaching, problem-solving approach, mastery learning approach, etc. provide important topics for research. History of institutions and organizations. Research on the history of some schools, colleges, universities, and other educational institutions also provide a variety of problems for historical research. When studying such history, the same method applies for the study of educators' life. Procedure of historical research. The steps involved in conducting the historical research study are the same as for other types of research, but the nature of the subject matter requires the researcher to apply some special standards and techniques. In general, the historical research involves the steps like selection of the problem, formulation of the hypothesis, data collection, data analysis, data synthesis, and finally, write the historical report. In conducting a historical study, the researcher can neither manipulate nor control any of the variables. On the other hand, there is no way the researchers can affect events of the past. The researchers can, however, apply objectively in attempting to determine exactly what did happen in the past. Selection of the problem. In historical research, the problem like history of individuals, institutions, organizations, educational law, curriculum, administrative structure, teacher education, textbook can be selected for study. Important concepts, thoughts that have influenced education during a specific period of time in a given culture can also be studied. The researcher should carefully examine that the problems selected should not only be of the historical significance but also be reliable so far as the method and sources of the data are concerned. Sometimes many worthwhile topics of the historical importance are discarded when adequate data are not available. Formulation of the hypothesis. The hypotheses that the researchers formulate for historical study are useful in explaining events, conditions, or phenomena of the historical period under study. While formulating hypotheses, a researcher may formulate questions that are most appropriate for the past events he is investigating and then directs his research towards seeking answers to these questions with the help of evidence. Data collection. After the problem has been selected and defined, an appropriate hypothesis or questions have been formulated. The researcher has to collect all the data available so that hypothesis may be thoroughly verified. In a historical research study, the review of related literature and the study procedure are part of the same process. The term literature is taken in a broader sense in a historical study and refers to all sorts of written communication. The written communication may be in the form of legal documents, records, meetings, letters, and other documents which will not normally be indexed alphabetically by subject, author, and title in a library. A historical research study in education may also involve interviews with persons who participated in the events or process under investigation, if it has occurred in the recent past. There is every possibility that interview with a person believed to have been involved in an incident may reveal that he can recollect only partially the details of the event. Sources of data. Sources of data in a historical research study are classified into two major categories: primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources: first-hand information, such as original documents and reports by actual participants or observers. And secondary sources: second-hand information, such as reference books or reports by relatives of the actual participants or observers. Primary source of data. Documents. Documents are the records and written by actual participants or observers of an event. These sources are produced for the purpose of transmitting information to be used in the future. Documents classified as primary sources are constitutions, charters, laws, court decisions, official records, letters, diaries, census informations, declarations, certificates, handbills, receipts, newspapers and magazine accounts, advertisements, films, pictures, paintings, and research reports. Remains. Remains are the objects associated with a person, group, or period. Skeletons, tools, weapons, clothing, buildings, furniture, coins, and art objects are examples of these relics that were not intended for use in the transmitting informations or as record. However, these sources may provide clear evidence about the past and may reveal a great deal of information about the way of life of a people living in that particular period. Oral testimony is the spoken account of a witness of or participant in an event. The evidence is obtained in a personal interview and may be recorded or transcribed as the witness narrates his or her experiences. Secondary sources of data. Secondary sources are the reports of a person who narrates the testimony of an actual witness of or participants in an event. Secondary sources of data are usually of limited worth for research purpose because of the errors that may result when information is passed on from one person to another. Most history textbooks and encyclopedias are examples of secondary sources, for they are often several times revised from the original first-hand account of events. Some types of material may be secondary source of the some purpose and primary source for another. For example, a secondary school textbook in Pakistan studies is a secondary source, but if we were making a study of the changing emphasis on the Pakistan ideology in secondary school Pakistan study textbook, the book would be a primary source of data. Data analysis, historical criticism. The historian does not often use the method of direct observation. Past events can't be repeated at will, because the historian gets much of the data from the reports of those who witnessed or participated in these events. The data must be carefully analyzed to shift true from the false. Trustworthy, usable data in historical research are known as historical evidence. That body of validated information can be accepted as a trustworthy and proper basis for the testing and interpretation of the hypothesis. Historical evidence is derived from historical data by the process of criticism. All sources of historical data must be subjected to careful scientific analysis to determine both their authenticity, external criticism, and accuracy, internal criticism. External criticism. External criticism establishes the authenticity of data. Various tests of the genuineness may be employed. Establishing the age or the authorship of the documents may require intricate test of the signature, handwritten, script, type, language usage, knowledge available at the time, the consistency with what is not. It may involve physical and chemical test of ink, paint, paper, cloth, stone, metal or wood. Are these elements consistent with known facts about the person, the knowledge available, and the technology of the period in which the remains or the documents originated? Internal criticism. After the authenticity of the historical data has been established, the researcher proceeds to internal criticism. It is also called as higher criticism and is concerned with the accuracy, validity, credibility, or worth of the content of the documents. Besides the textual criticism, it also involves such factors as competence, good faith, bias, or general reputation of the author. Internal criticism is positive in nature when the researcher seeks to discover the literal and the real meaning of the text. It is negative when the researcher tries to seek every possible reason for disbelieving the statement made, questioning critically the competence or truthfulness or accuracy and honesty of the author. The competence and accuracy of an author is evaluated in relation to his status as trained eyewitness, presence of emotional stress or pressure that might influence the observation, and the extent to which the conditions for observing were favorable. The author of a document may know the truth, but for certain reasons he may report the evidence only in part or in a distorted form. Distortion of the facts may result from author's motives or bias. It may also result from his personal weakness of telling lies, desire to please the public, or vested interest. Internal criticism, establishment of the accuracy is considerably more difficult. Determining the accuracy of the documents, the four factors to be considered: knowledge and competence of the author. It must be determined whether the person who wrote the document is or was a competent person or a person in a position to be the knowledgeable concerning what actually occurred. Time delay. An important consideration is how much time is likely to have elapsed between the event's occurrence and recording of the facts. Bias and motives of the author. People often report or record incorrect information. Such distortion of the truth may be intentional or unintentional. People, for example, tend to remember what they want to remember. People also tend to amplify and little details in order to make a story more interesting. A more serious problem occurs when the recorder has motives for consciously or unconsciously misinterpreting the facts. Consistency of data. Each piece of the evidence must be compared with all other pieces to determine the degree of agreement. If one observer account disagrees with those of other observers, his testimony may be suspect. Data synthesis. Just as a review of the literature should not be the series of the annotations, the results of a historical research should not be a chronological listing of the events. Critics of the historical research question the validity of generalizations based on events that can never be exactly duplicated. Since summarization of the historical research data involves logical analysis rather than statistical analysis, the researcher must take care to be as objective as possible. The ultimate goal in the historical research is not only to establish facts, but also to determine trends which the data may suggest, and to draw inferences from the data. The researcher must show an understanding of the sequence of events and must draw a vertical relationship of facts. His goal should be one of the synthesis and interpretation rather than more summation. Writing the historical report. After the data have been properly synthesized, the researcher has to write a well-organized report of history. The report of historical research includes a statement of the problem, a review of the literature, the statement of the objectives and hypotheses, survey and sources of data, methods of collection and ordering the data, external and internal criticism, synthesis of data, the conclusion reached, and bibliography. The writing of historical research report requires the highest level of the scholarship on the part of the researcher. The researcher must be elegant and objective in his style of writing the research report. However, because of the discontinuous and incomplete nature of historical data on which valid generalizations can't be established, it is generally accepted that in the writing of historical research report, the researcher has to be permitted a little more freedom on the subjective interpretation of data. At the same time, it must be ensured that the presentation is sufficiently systematic and does not hide or distort the truth. Writing the historical research report is a challenging job as it calls for the creativity in addition to the qualities of the imagination and the resourcefulness. It is apparent that the historical research is difficult and demanding. The collection of the historical evidence requires long hours of the careful examination of the documents. Historical research may involve traveling to distant places to examine the necessary documents. In fact, any significant historical study would demand that few students have the time, financial resources, patience, or expertise to meet. For these reasons, the good historical studies are not often attempted for the purpose of meeting academic degree requirements.